If you're familiar with this channel by now, you'll know I love The Last of Us, now commonly referred to as Part 1. I've played through it 26 times now, over 9 years. I've made 7 videos about its characters and the franchise. So like many of you, when I saw in 2016 that Part 1 was going to be getting a sequel, I lost my mind. I couldn't wait to see Joel and Ellie again. And the marketing leading up to the game's release gave us teasers of that, until the 19th of June 2020, when the game released. Most of what was seen in the trailers was not present in the main game, sending players into a frenzy, and of course the narrative direction was a massive shock to the fanbase, to the point it has now split them in two. Today I'll be looking through arguably the most divisive video game ever made, The Last of Us Part 2. It goes without saying that this video will at some point contain spoilers for this game, so consider this your warning. With that out of the way, let's begin. For this critique, I will try my utmost to keep the runtime down, as I've recently been pushing for the 10-minute mark. I have covered The Last of Us Part 2's quirks and flaws in a few videos on the characters, such as Ellie and Abby. But today, I'd like to critique certain aspects of the story, to see where all the backlash came from, and to see what could have been done better. And I also would like to look into the gameplay, because I do think this is overlooked, due to the divisive narrative direction. First things first, it is obvious the game's director, Neil Druckmann, wanted a story of revenge, and see how it consumes you, and how sometimes it isn't worth it. The problem is that the narrative isn't very well delivered. The start of the revenge quest is when Joel is killed by a mysterious woman, in which Ellie spends 3 days in Seattle trying to track her down. And this is the first problem. Because we have no idea who Abby is, long-time fans immediately become hostile to the character. And when we see the flip side of the story, some fans are so enraged they don't even care for the character, let alone their backstory. Joel's death was all wrong. Not that he died, more how he died. We really should have seen more of Abby in the opening hours. See her somehow get into Jackson. I mean, it looked like Tommy was going to take them in anyway. See her maybe get close to Ellie. Then we could have seen her plan to get to Joel that way. Maybe goes on some sort of patrol with Joel. Then, as she's incognito in Jackson, we could get hints that she wants revenge for her father's death. Then players might feel some empathy as to why she does what she does. Then players would be torn on who to side with, or even toy with the idea of the choices that these characters take are even worth it after all the blood they spill between them. But Druckmann decided to go down the cheap route of relying on the shock factor, and kills Joel off in the first hour. It might even be less than that. So straight away, he's written off any chance of the killer's redemption / revenge arc to make sense and or be justified. Yes, you might say Abby builds up our trust and gains our sympathy through her flashbacks and the 3 days in Seattle. But again, if you're a long-time fan of Joel and Ellie, it's going to be very hard to achieve that. The reliance on coincidence doesn't help either. How Abby found Joel should have been next to impossible in that snowstorm, and also while fleeing from dozens of infected in any direction. She still happens to stumble upon Joel and Tommy, also out on patrol. And don't get me started on Joel and Tommy missing the clues on Abby's group, that they were more than just a group struggling to get by. I've mentioned this in my video, Did Joel Deserve Better? And what happened to Tommy Miller in The Last of Us Part 2. To sum it up briefly, they had plenty of firepower, more than just a 9mm pistol. They had WLF jackets, or at least Abby did, in which Tommy was already aware of the group, and they also had a military-grade vehicle parked in the garage. How Joel as well as Tommy didn't notice that, I do not know. It all adds to Joel's death just being completely avoidable and abysmally executed. Now Ellie also has her flaws too. Of course she wants to avenge Joel. Some of us wanted to also. She spends her 3 days in Seattle taking out as many WLF as possible to get to Abby and her friends. especially in Hillcrest, with no remorse might I add. Yet, when she gets to Nora, she almost resents what she is doing. Same with Mel. Now Mel I can understand to a degree. Ellie didn't know she was with child, and it makes her question whether it was all worth it. But I would bring up the argument that when Ellie is steamrollering her way through Hillcrest, for example, any one of those female members she killed could have been in early stages of pregnancy. The WLF would still be happy to send them out on patrols, given they were completely fine sending Mel out. But despite what happened, Ellie is still out for Abby. Another really odd choice later on in Ellie's journey is when Tommy convinces her to leave Seattle, in which would be leaving Abby alive. Yes, Dina was unwell, but Ellie could have easily decided to stay behind. Jesse and Tommy would have been fine on their own. I've never understood that choice, but obviously Abby does put pay to that. What lets Ellie down again is that even though she is beaten to a pulp, she still goes after Abby, which is fine, but clearly we can see Ellie cannot match her strength. Ellie should have left things here, knowing she cannot win. Abby has now let her live twice, but fair dues, Ellie does track her down, all the way to Santa Barbara, in which is probably hundreds of miles from Jackson, and would have taken weeks or months to get to. She even infiltrates a new enemy faction's base in order to get to her, and when she does, she forces her to a fight to the death, but then lets her go. Why did it take for her to see Joel at peace here in her mind, for her to feel content enough to let Abby go? Maybe the fact she saw her relationship with Lev? But then Ellie did threaten his life. Surely she would have felt content at the farm with Dina. But no, Druckmann makes us sit on the edge of our seats, rooting for Ellie to finally put an end to all of this, but then doesn't. To me, I really think they should have left it at the farm, and not have Ellie go back after her. Yes, I do understand that it's meant to leave Ellie, as well as the player, broken, to show that revenge isn't worth it. Ellie returns home to an empty house to rub some extra salt in the wound. Dina warned her not to go. It leaves the player empty. We spent 30 hours of our lives for nothing on a story that is so poorly structured and destroys all the remaining original characters, and it severely wasted our time on the Santa Barbara plotline. Like I aforementioned, the farm would have been a good place to finish. A part of me wanted Abby neutralised, as she did next to nothing to redeem herself, but a part of me knows she could have been a whole lot more, as I explained in my video about Abby. Now, talking of Abby, I do want to recap on some points I made in that video about her 3 days in Seattle. So we're made to feel the weight of Ellie's choices of her 3 days in Seattle, but when it comes to Abby, she can do what she bloody well pleases. I can only think of one time she shows a redeeming quality, and that was saving Yara and Lev from the Seraphites, and perhaps leaving Ellie alive for the second time. She never once second guesses her choices. Not once does she feel remorse for what she did to Joel, and when she took out Jesse, in which had nothing to do with what Ellie did to her friends. I feel if Abby started to resent what she was doing, and borderline thought back to what she put Ellie through, to mirror somewhat what Ellie was feeling, I think this would have made the final confrontation more difficult for the players. But obviously it didn't go that way. Abby got everything she wanted, whilst not even showing any remorse or hint of any redemption. And it's not the character's fault. It's poor writing and narrative planning. I do honestly believe there could have been more to Abby's character, but because of the way she was written, I would say she's mostly disliked by the community. It will be interesting how part 3 will play out, as she is now back with the Fireflies. She even got her own way there too. Will she track Ellie down to get the cure out of her? Who knows, but Naughty Dog's writing room is going to have an uphill battle, whatever they decide. Apart from the controversial narrative, Part 2 does have some good things going for it. The visuals and animation for the time were phenomenal, and still are. It is one of the most well-polished video games I've ever played. It has a stable frame rate, and hardly suffers from any glitches or bugs, at least in the 3 times playing the game over PlayStation 4 and 5. The gameplay, to put it simply, is so much fun and extremely fluid. It was a massive step up from the first game. I love playing as Ellie. The developers really lean into how nimble she is. Even though the game is clearly a linear one, there are still so many options to approach navigating the levels. With the squeeze-throughs and the long grass, the stealth mechanics were greatly overhauled. We were even given a part of Seattle that was semi-linear, but open to explore wherever you liked. I spent hours in this area, and was probably my favourite part of the game. I will always defend Part 2 on its gameplay and level design, and its visuals. It's a shame, as this is always overlooked by its story. Deep down, I wanted to like this game. I desperately wanted to see Joel and Ellie again, and I did. But it wasn't what I was expecting. The flashbacks were bittersweet, mostly with Ellie not being able to make her mind up whether she actually believed Joel's lie or not. Again, I have covered this, but I suppose the original fanbase didn't really know what we wanted from these characters in this sequel, just like Druckmann didn't. That's why sometimes when I imagined a sequel, I was worried that it might not be worth ruining a story and characters that have already been established, and arguably had an open-ended but satisfying ending. Making a sequel is always a risky move, whether that is a TV show, film, or a video game. But in this case of The Last of Us Part 2, in my opinion, it did not pay off, at least in terms of pleasing the audience. Perhaps that wasn't the plan. This is probably the saddest video game I've ever played. I've never felt so empty after finishing a video game. Maybe that was the whole idea, to make us feel as broken as the characters. The only person who will know that answer is the man who created it.